They were called savages, but they ended the greatest empire the world had ever known. This is not just a story of Rome's fall. It's the rise of a world born from fire, betrayal, and blood. And it all began with the barbarians. If you want to dive deep into epic history like this, subscribe now, like this video, and comment below with your favorite historical moment. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman Empire had stood as the center of the known world. Its legions had conquered distant lands, its laws governed millions, and its roads stretched from the British Isles to the sands of Egypt. Rome was not just a city, it was an idea, a godlike force that claimed eternity by the 4th century AD. The empire still carried the weight of that legacy, but its walls were cracking. The vast borders had become harder to defend. Corruption bloomed in the Senate, civil wars had weakened the army, and more dangerously, beyond the Rhine and the Danube, a storm was brewing. To the Romans, those beyond the frontier were barbary, uncivilized, chaotic, primitive. They came from dense forests, snowy plains, and wild steppes. Their languages were strange, their gods unknown. But these so-called barbarians were changing. Tribes like the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Saxons were evolving into warlike confederations. They had seen Rome's wealth. They had fought as mercenaries in its armies, and they had learned how Rome fought and how to break it. Some wanted peace and land. Others wanted revenge. All of them wanted a future. Rome, meanwhile, still believed in its invincibility. Emperors rose and fell with shocking speed. Armies fought more against each other than against the empire's true enemies. The eastern and western halves of the empire began drifting apart. One stronger, one weaker. The west bleeding, and then came pressure from the east. The Huns, a tidal wave of horsemen from the Asian steppes, swept westward, pushing Germanic tribes ahead of them, like an avalanche, forcing everything in its path toward Roman territory. Panic gripped the empire. Refugees flooded the borders. Some were allowed in, others broke through by force. The gates of Rome were no longer impenetrable. The eternal empire, proud, powerful, and ancient, was facing a new reality. A world it no longer understood. Enemies it had underestimated, and a storm it could no longer contain. The barbarians were coming, not in scattered raids, but as nations, and they would not stop until Rome fell. Long before the Goths breached the walls of Rome, before the Vandals sacked its sacred temples, there came others, forgotten by most, but feared by Rome. The Cimbri and the Teuton. It was the 2nd century BC. The Roman Republic was expanding fast, devouring enemies in all directions. But to the north, beyond the Alps, came whispers of a storm. Tribes of giant warriors with strange weapons, unfamiliar tongues, and an endless hunger for land were on the move. The Cimbri and the Teutones, not yet seen as barbarians, but as something worse, unknown. They weren't a single army. They were a migration. Entire nations on foot. Men, women, and children pushing south, searching for a new home. No Roman general had seen anything like it. At first, Rome dismissed the threat. Then came the defeats. In 113 BC, the Romans met the invaders at Nerea. What they expected to be a quick victory turned into humiliation. The legions were crushed. It was just the beginning. Over the next decade, the Cimbri and Teutones carved a bloody path through Roman lands. In 105 BC, they delivered one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman history at the Battle of Arasio. Over 80,000 Roman soldiers slaughtered. Panic spread through the Republic. The Senate feared that Rome itself might fall, but from the ashes rose a new kind of Roman general. Gaius Marius. He reformed the army, trained it, hardened it, and when the time came, he led it to vengeance. In 102 and 101 BC, Marius confronted the invaders in two decisive battles at Aquae Sextiae and Versailles. The Cimbri and Teutones were annihilated. The threat was ended. Rome celebrated. Statues were raised. Marius was hailed as a savior. But the memory remained. For the first time, Rome had faced not kings or armies, but entire peoples on the move. It was a glimpse into the future, a warning, because centuries later it would happen again, and next time Rome wouldn't survive. By the late 4th century AD, the Roman Empire faced one of its deadliest challenges yet: the Visigoths, a powerful Germanic tribe long pushed and pressured by the expanding Huns from the east. Starving and desperate, thousands of Visigoths crossed the frozen Danube River in 376 AD, seeking refuge inside Roman borders. The Romans were wary but agreed to let them settle as federates, allied tribes allowed to live in exchange for military service. But the reality was far more complicated. Corruption, greed, and broken promises from Roman officials led to famine and mistreatment of the Visigoths. Tensions simmered like a powder keg ready to explode. In 378 AD, the fragile peace shattered. At the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman Emperor Valens led a force to crush the rebellious Visigoths. Confident but poorly prepared, the Roman legions marched into a deadly trap. Gothic warriors, fierce and battle-hardened, struck with brutal precision. The battle turned into a massacre. Emperor Valens himself died on the battlefield, one of the few Roman emperors killed in combat. The loss was catastrophic. Nearly 2/3 of the Roman army wiped out, including much of the empire's elite forces. Adrianople was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological blow to Rome's prestige and power. The empire's myth of invincibility cracked. The Visigoths, once mere barbarians, had proven they could defeat Rome's legions in open battle. Their victory sent shockwaves across the empire and emboldened other tribes to challenge Roman authority. Historians mark Adrianople as the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. Though the empire would survive for another century, its days were numbered. The Gothic storm unleashed forces that Rome could no longer control. The Visigoths would continue to carve their legacy, sacking Rome itself decades later in 410 AD under their king, Alaric, a moment unthinkable just years before Adrianople. This battle was a brutal reminder. The ancient world was changing. The invincible Roman Empire was now a shadow of its former self, battered and vulnerable to the storms of history that were about to engulf it. In the summer of 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. The city of Rome, once the unshakable heart of a vast empire, fell to the Visigoths, led by King Alaric. For the first time in nearly 800 years, Rome's gates were breached, its streets flooded with invaders, and its glory forever tarnished. Alaric was no mere barbarian raider, a skilled commander and shrewd politician. He had spent years pushing the crumbling Roman Empire to grant his people land, recognition, and security. Yet repeated betrayals and broken promises hardened his resolve. When diplomacy failed, Alaric set his sights on the eternal city itself. Rome was no longer the bustling capital of a powerful empire. The Western Roman Empire was fractured, weakened by internal strife, corruption, and decades of military defeats. The population had dwindled, Many of its monuments, once symbols of grandeur, were in disrepair. But Rome still stood as the symbolic heart of the ancient world, and its capture would echo through history. As the Visigothic army surrounded the city, panic spread among Rome's citizens. Emperor Honorius, safely ensconced far away in Ravenna, was powerless to defend the city. Inside the walls, fear mingled with disbelief. When the gates finally opened to Alaric's forces, the sack began. For 3 days and nights, the Visigoths looted temples, palaces, and homes. Priceless artworks and treasures were seized. Fires raged through the city's ancient neighborhoods. Yet, in a remarkable act of restraint, Alaric ordered his men to spare churches and Christian places of worship, a testament to his own conversion and the changing tides of religion in Rome. The psychological shock was immense. Rome, once the indomitable capital of an empire that spanned continents, had been taken by an army of so-called barbarians. The world watched in horror and disbelief. This event shattered the myth of Rome's invincibility. It marked a symbolic end to the ancient Roman world and a turning point toward the medieval era. The sack of Rome in 410 AD was not just a military defeat. It was the collapse of an age. And though Rome would endure for centuries more, its fall under Alaric's siege remains one of history's most profound moments. A grim reminder that even the greatest empires can crumble from within. In the twilight of the Roman Empire, a new terror emerged from the vast steppes of Central Asia. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, they surged westward like a storm unleashed, striking fear into the hearts of emperors and commoners alike. Their name alone whispered doom, the wrath from the east. Attila, known as the Scourge of God, was a warrior unmatched in ferocity and cunning. Under his rule, the Huns transformed from scattered nomads into a ruthless force of destruction. Their swift horsemen and brutal tactics left entire cities in ashes and empires trembling. The Roman Empire, already weakened by internal corruption and external pressures, faced a new nightmare. Attila's campaigns devastated the Balkans, pillaging villages and sacking towns with terrifying speed. No fortress seemed impregnable, no army able to halt their relentless advance. But perhaps the most legendary moment of this era was when Attila's forces reached the gates of Rome itself. In 452 AD, with the city vulnerable and panic rising, the fate of the Eternal City hung in the balance. The Pope, Leo I, later known as Saint Leo the Great, stepped forward as an unlikely savior. According to legend, he met Attila face to face, accompanied by a delegation of bishops and nobles, bearing no weapons but faith and diplomacy. The encounter remained shrouded in mystery, but its impact was profound. Whether through negotiation, a show of divine intervention, or the harsh realities of disease and famine weakening the Hunnic forces, Attila turned away from Rome, sparing the city from destruction. This moment marked a fragile reprieve, but not a total victory. The Huns continued to ravage the empire's borders, shaking the very foundations of the ancient world. Attila's reign of terror symbolized the unstoppable forces reshaping Europe, the end of antiquity and the chaotic dawn of the Middle Ages. His name became a byword for terror, a living nightmare that haunted generations. The Pope's bold confrontation with Attila echoed through history as a testament to faith and courage in the face of overwhelming darkness. The Huns' wrath was not just a military threat, it was a brutal force that accelerated the fall of Rome and reshaped the destiny of Europe forever. Just 45 years after Alaric's Visigoths shocked the world by sacking Rome, The Eternal City faced a second catastrophic assault, this time from the sea. In 455 AD, the Vandals, a fierce Germanic tribe led by King Genseric, launched a devastating naval attack that would leave Rome bruised, humbled, and forever scarred. Unlike previous invaders who approached by land, the Vandals came from the Mediterranean, their swift ships cutting through the waves toward Italy's western coast. Rome, once protected by powerful legions and ancient walls, found itself vulnerable to this new maritime threat. The Vandals had spent decades carving out a kingdom in North Africa, seizing Carthage and dominating the western Mediterranean. Their naval prowess was unmatched. Genseric, a master strategist and ruthless leader, understood that controlling the sea meant controlling the fate of Rome. When the Vandals appeared off the coast, panic swept through the city. Emperor Valentinian III was dead, and the Western Roman Empire was crumbling from within. Political chaos and military weakness left Rome exposed, its defenses thin and disorganized. As the Vandals sailed up the Tiber River, the gates of the city fell once again. For 2 weeks, the Vandals plundered Rome with brutal efficiency. Temples, palaces, and homes were ransacked. Priceless works of art, gold, silver, and sacred relics were seized. The population was terrorized, and many were taken captive. The term vandalism would later be coined to describe this wanton destruction, a lasting legacy of Genseric's sack. But the Vandals' assault was not merely about looting, it was a stark symbol of Rome's declining power. The once mighty empire had lost control of its own city to foreign invaders arriving by sea. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was now a battleground where old glory was drowned in chaos. Yet, even in devastation, Rome endured. The city's spirit, battered but unbroken, survived centuries more of turmoil and transformation. The Vandal sack of 455 AD marked a grim milestone, a clear sign that the ancient world was slipping away, replaced by new powers rising from the ashes. It was a reminder that history is written not just by victories, but also by moments of profound loss. Rome, the Eternal City, had been sacked twice in just half a century. Its fall no longer a distant threat, but a harsh reality, and from these ruins, a new Europe would slowly emerge. The year was 476 AD, a date forever etched in history as the symbolic end of the Western Roman Empire. The once mighty empire, which had ruled vast territories across Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean for centuries, was finally undone. By a final, decisive blow, the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor to sit on the Roman throne. Romulus Augustulus was no ordinary ruler. A teenager thrust into power as a puppet emperor by his father Orestes, he ruled from the crumbling city of Ravenna, far from the grandeur of Rome's golden days. His reign was brief and fragile, shadowed by the empire's rapid disintegration and growing power struggles among barbarian leaders. Among these rising forces was Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain and commander of mercenary troops who had grown tired of the empire's weakness and broken promises. The Roman legions that once commanded respect were now fragmented and unreliable. Odoacer's soldiers revolted, demanding land and recognition, a request that Rome could no longer deny. In a final act that would resonate through the ages, Odoacer marched on Ravenna, confronting young Romulus Augustulus. Without a grand battle, the emperor was forced to abdicate, ending a line of rulers that had governed for over a millennium. Odoacer did not claim the imperial title for himself. Instead, he sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople, signaling that the Western throne was empty. Its authority effectively ended. The fall of Romulus Augustulus was not just a political event, it was the death knell for the Western Roman Empire, the collapse of an era. The once unshakable empire that had shaped the ancient world was no more. Its vast territories fragmented into kingdoms ruled by barbarian kings, each carving out their own dominions from the ruins of Rome. Yet, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, endured, preserving Roman law, culture, and traditions for centuries to come. The fall of the last Western emperor marked a profound transformation, the end of antiquity and the dawn of the Middle Ages. Europe would never be the same. The legacy of Rome lived on, but the world it had built had crumbled, making way for a new age of kingdoms, knights, and shifting power. Romulus Augustulus's fall was both an end and a beginning, a moment that defined the transition from the ancient world to the medieval era. History had turned a decisive page. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not mark the end of civilization, but the beginning of a new chapter shaped by the so-called barbarian kingdoms. These tribes, once seen as destroyers, became the architects of medieval Europe, laying the foundations for the modern world. The Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Franks, and Lombards established new realms across the former Roman territories. They blended Roman traditions with their own customs, creating hybrid cultures that preserved elements of Roman law, language, and governance while introducing new social structures. The Franks, under Charlemagne, would unite much of Western Europe and revive the idea of a Christian empire, setting the stage for the Holy Roman Empire and shaping European identity for centuries. The barbarians also influenced medieval art, architecture, and warfare. Their warrior culture, tribal laws, and shifting alliances defined the political landscape of the Middle Ages. Despite centuries of conflict and transformation, many modern European nations trace their roots back to these early kingdoms. Far from mere conquerors, the barbarians were creators-builders of a new order, rising from Rome's ruins. Their legacy is a testament to resilience and adaptation, showing how destruction can give way to renewal, and chaos can birth civilization. The medieval world, and ultimately modern Europe, owe much to these tribes once called barbarians. If you believe history should feel alive, not just remembered, subscribe to Fragments of History and join us for more epic stories from the past.